A thug kicks a service dog at a bus stop, savagely attacking the helpless golden retriever while its blind veteran owner begs him to stop. The massive bully towers over the 68-year-old soldier, laughing as he threatens to hurt the dog again, completely unaware that a quiet stranger has been watching from the bench behind him. But this isn't just any bystander stepping forward to intervene. This is Donnie Yen himself, the legendary martial arts master who spent decades perfecting the ancient art of Wing Chun. The thug has no idea he just committed an act of pure evil in front of a man who's made a career out of delivering justice with surgical precision. While the coward continues terrorizing the helpless veteran and his injured service dog, the 61-year-old legend rises with the fluid grace of a predator, his calm eyes promising swift retribution. The bully's about to learn why attacking innocent animals and elderly heroes is the worst mistake of his pathetic life. Witnesses pull out their phones, thinking they're recording another cruel assault, but they're actually about to capture a masterclass in righteous fury. What happens when unstoppable force meets absolute evil? Will the thug survive 2 minutes against a master who fights for honor? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his miserable existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning rush hour painted downtown Sacramento's J Street in familiar strokes of urban routine. Office workers clutched coffee cups like lifelines, students hunched over phones, and service workers waited with the patient resignation of people who knew buses ran on their own mysterious schedule. The concrete bench at the main stop bore the scars of countless commuters, worn smooth in places, tagged with faded graffiti that spoke of dreams and frustrations. Frank Kowalski arrived at 7:15 a.m. sharp, just as he had every Tuesday for the past 3 years. The 68-year-old veteran moved with deliberate precision, his worn canvas messenger bag slung across his chest, his faded army cap positioned at regulation angle. Beside him, Ranger matched his pace perfectly, 70 pounds. Of golden retriever trained to be Frank's eyes in a world he could no longer see. "Our spot, boy," Frank murmured, settling onto the left side of the bench with practiced ease. Ranger took his position, lying calmly with his chin resting on crossed paws, brown eyes alert to everything his partner could not observe. The morning ritual unfolded, Frank checking his braille watch, organizing bus fare in a small leather coin purse, adjusting Ranger's service vest. Other regulars offered quiet acknowledgments. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop nodded respectfully. Carlos, the maintenance worker, touched his cap. They knew Frank's story. Vietnam veteran, lost his sight to shrapnel, lost his wife to cancer 5 years back. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was Frank's connection to independence and dignity. 7 minutes later, another figure approached the stop. The man appeared unremarkable at first glance. 5 feet 8 inches, wearing dark jeans and a plain gray Henley, carrying a folded Sacramento bee and a small leather messenger bag. Salt and pepper hair, intelligent dark eyes, the kind of unassuming presence that blended into any crowd. He chose the right side of the bench, maintaining respectful distance from Frank and Ranger. Donnie Yen unfolded his newspaper with precise movements, but his attention never fully settled on the headlines. Decades of martial arts training had honed his awareness into something approaching supernatural. Peripheral vision that caught every gesture, hearing that parsed conversations 3 blocks away, a sixth sense for danger that had kept him alive. Through countless film stunts and real-world confrontations, the digital display announced the number 19 bus running 5 minutes late. Frank gently stroked Ranger's head. "Little late today, boy." His voice carried the gravelly warmth of a man who'd learned to find contentment in small consistencies. More commuters gathered. The stop filled with the usual collection of early workers, students heading to community college, elderly residents beginning their daily errands. Tuesday morning in America's capital city, predictable as sunrise, peaceful as prayer. Donnie glanced at his watch, 7:23 a.m., and returned to reading about city council budget disputes and high school football scores. But part of his mind cataloged everything: wind direction, escape routes, the positioning of every person within a 50-foot radius. Old habits from a life where observation meant survival. where the difference between life and death often came down to noticing what others missed. That Ranger's ears twitched slightly, picking up something his golden retriever senses identified as approaching trouble. Frank felt the subtle tension in his companion's posture but attributed it to normal urban sounds, traffic, construction, the everyday symphony of city life. Neither man knew that their peaceful Tuesday morning was about to explode into violence. That would expose a criminal conspiracy reaching into the darkest corners of veteran exploitation. The trouble announced itself with the heavy footfalls of unlaced work boots on concrete and the stench of stale beer mixed with cigarette smoke. Tommy Tank Morrison approached the bus stop like a storm front. 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and bad attitude wrapped in a stained Sacramento Kings jersey and cargo shorts that had seen better decades, Tank's bloodshot eyes surveyed the gathered commuters with predatory calculation. 24 hours earlier, he'd been celebrating another successful recruitment for Torino's organization with whiskey that burned and women who cost too much. Now, nursing a hangover that felt like artillery bombardment, he needed someone to absorb his pain and frustration. "Morning, losers," Tank announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying the aggressive cheerfulness of a man spoiling for a fight. "Beautiful day to be pathetic, isn't it?" The other commuters responded with practiced urban invisibility, avoiding eye contact, checking phones with sudden urgency, shifting away from the obvious threat. But Tank fed on fear like a parasite feeds on blood. The more they cowered, the larger he grew. His gaze swept across students clutching textbooks, office workers pretending to read emails, elderly shoppers hoping to become wallpaper. Then his attention locked onto Frank, sitting peacefully with Ranger at his feet, apparently oblivious to the menace that had invaded their space. Well, Tank muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look what we got here. Old soldier. Boy taking up valuable real estate." Frank's military training had taught him to assess threats through sound and positioning. Tank's voice carried the particular blend of alcohol-fueled aggression and practiced cruelty that meant serious trouble. But Frank had faced worse than drunk bullies in Vietnamese jungles. He remained still, hoping the storm would pass. Ranger sensed the approaching danger with canine clarity. His ears sharpened to points, his body shifting from relaxed to alert. But service dog training overrode natural protective instincts. His job was to guide and assist Frank, not to attack threats. The golden retriever remained motionless, though tension coiled through his muscles like compressed springs. Tank began his psychological assault with the systematic cruelty of someone who'd perfected the art of torment. "Hey, Gramps, you taking up space for real people, or just pretending to wait for a bus you can't even see coming?" A few commuters glanced toward Frank with sympathy, but no one spoke up. Tank noticed their discomfort and smiled, the expression of a predator scenting blood. "What's the matter, everybody? Cat got your tongues? Or maybe you're all too chicken to tell Grandpa Moses here that he's in the way." Frank finally spoke, his voice carrying military courtesy despite the circumstances. "Good morning. There's plenty of room for everyone." Tank's face flushed red with alcohol and indignation. Being addressed politely by his intended victim felt like a slap across the face. "Good morning," he repeated mockingly. "What's good about it, old man? What's good about watching useless has-beens take up space that working people need?" Behind his newspaper, Donnie's breathing had shifted to the deeper, more centered pattern of someone preparing for violence. His feet adjusted slightly, finding better balance. The newspaper remained steady in his hands, but every other sense had sharpened to combat readiness. Tank stepped closer to Frank, his shadow falling across both veteran and dog. "I'm talking to you, Sergeant Blindness. You going to answer me, or just sit there like a worthless?" "I heard you," Frank interrupted quietly. "And I answered." The simple dignity in Frank's response only enraged Tank further. He'd expected cowering, pleading, the kind of pathetic submission that fed his ego. Instead, he faced calm military bearing that reminded him of his own failures and inadequacies. Tank's voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more threat than his earlier shouting. "You think you're better than me, don't you, old man? Think that uniform you probably never earned gives you some kind of special rights?" Frank remained seated, his hands resting calmly on his knees, but his jaw tightened at the insult to his service. I think there's room at this bus stop for both of us. I'm not looking for trouble. Well, trouble found you anyway. Tank snarled, moving closer until his knees almost touched Frank's. See, I got a problem with people who don't show proper respect. People who think they can just ignore me when I'm trying to have a conversation. The other commuters had created a wide circle around the confrontation, some pulling out phones to record what looked like inevitable violence. But no one stepped forward to intervene. Tank's size and aggressive demeanor had successfully isolated his target. You know what I think? Tank continued, his voice rising again. I think you're just another welfare case pretending to be a hero. Probably never saw combat. Probably never did nothing but push papers and collect government checks. Frank's hands clenched involuntarily at the accusation, but his voice remained steady. I served in Vietnam. 1st Infantry Division. I'm not looking for an argument about it. Vietnam. Tank laughed harshly. Right? And I'm John Wayne. You probably got that dog from some charity that felt sorry for you. What's he even supposed to do? Bark when your food stamps arrive. Ranger remained perfectly still, but his ears had flattened against his head. The golden retriever could sense his partner's rising distress and the growing threat from the large, aggressive human, but his training held him in place. Tank noticed Frank's protective hand moving toward Ranger and interpreted it as weakness. Oh, you're worried about your little pet? Maybe you should be. Maybe someone needs to teach both of you some manners about taking up space that belongs to real Americans. Behind his newspaper, Donnie had identified Tank as a clear and present danger. The man's body language, escalating aggression, and specific targeting of a vulnerable veteran triggered every protective instinct honed through decades of martial arts philosophy. But Donnie also recognized the importance of not escalating unless absolutely necessary. Look, Frank said, his military bearing showing cracks under the sustained verbal assault. There's no need for this. The bus will be here soon, and there's room for everyone. Tank saw the slight tremor in Frank's voice as surrender and pressed. His advantage. No, old man, there isn't room for everyone. There's room for people who matter, and then there's people like you, taking up space, breathing air that useful folks could be using. He gestured broadly at the other commuters. Look at them. They know you don't belong here. They know you're just another burden on society, another broken-down soldier who couldn't hack it in the real world. Frank's composure finally began to crack. 38 years since Vietnam, 20 years since losing his sight, 5 years since losing his wife. Through it all, he'd maintained his dignity and his belief that service meant something. But Tank's words cut deep into wounds that had never fully healed. Please, Frank said quietly, just leave us alone. The word please was exactly what Tank had been waiting for. The moment of submission, the crack in his victim's armor that would let him deliver the killing blow to Frank's dignity. His face twisted into a cruel smile. Please, he repeated mockingly. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Now you're starting to understand how this works. Tank drew back his right leg, targeting Ranger's ribcage with deliberate, calculated cruelty. The kick connected with a sickening thud that echoed across the suddenly silent bus stop. Ranger yelped in pain and surprise, his body jerking away. From the impact, Frank cried out, "Ranger," and immediately dropped to his knees, his hands searching for his companion's injury. The golden retriever whimpered softly, favoring his left side, but remaining close to his partner despite the pain. The entire bus stop fell dead silent except for Ranger's labored breathing. Several commuters gasped. One woman whispered, "Oh my God," but still no one moved to help. Tank stood over Frank and the injured dog, satisfaction radiating from every pore. Maybe next time you'll move when I tell you to. Behind Tank, a newspaper folded with precise, controlled movements. Donnie Yen rose from the bench with fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. One moment seated and reading, the next standing with perfect balance and controlled energy. At 5 feet 8 inches and 160 pounds, he appeared almost fragile next to Tank's massive frame, but there was something in his movement that suggested coiled power waiting for release. That was unnecessary, Donnie said in perfect English touched with a slight Hong Kong accent. His voice carried quiet authority that cut through Tank's post-violence euphoria like a blade through silk. Tank turned to face this new challenger, his expression shifting from satisfaction to amusement. The sight of another old-timer stepping forward struck him as cosmic justice. Two pathetic has-beens for the price of one humiliation. "Oh, this is rich." Tank laughed, spreading his arms wide to emphasize the size difference. "What are you? His boyfriend? Another charity case who thinks he's tough?" Donnie ignored the insults completely, moving to Frank's side with economical steps that covered ground faster than seemed possible. He knelt gracefully beside the veteran and his injured dog, his hands gentle but knowledgeable as he examined Ranger's condition. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" Donnie asked Frank, his voice showing genuine concern that contrasted sharply with Tank's crude aggression. That Frank's hands joined Donnie's in checking Ranger's ribs. "His breathing seems okay, but he's favoring his left side. Probably bruised ribs. Maybe worse." The veteran's voice carried professional assessment mixed with deep worry for his companion. "We should get him to a veterinarian," Donnie agreed, his fingers finding the spots where Ranger's ribs showed tenderness. The golden retriever remained calm under their examination, trusting these gentle hands that meant help rather than harm. Tank's face flushed red with rage at being ignored. He'd delivered what should have been a devastating blow to Frank's spirit, but instead of cowering submission, he was watching two old men calmly discussing veterinary care as if he didn't exist. "Hey," Tank shouted, shoving Donnie's shoulder hard with both hands. "I'm talking to you, Bruce Lee." The push should have sent a smaller man stumbling backward. Instead, Donnie absorbed the force without losing balance, his body remaining rooted, like a tree while Tank's hands encountered something unexpectedly solid. The physical impossibility didn't register in Tank's alcohol-clouded mind, but the complete lack of effect on his target did. Still kneeling beside Frank and Ranger, Donnie looked up at Tank with calm eyes that seemed to see everything. "I heard you. I also saw what you did. Neither was necessary." Tank's worldview couldn't process being lectured by someone he saw as smaller, older, and weaker. Being dismissed as unnecessary by a potential victim triggered every insecurity and rage-fueled impulse he'd cultivated over years of bullying. "You want to do something about it, old man?" Tank snarled, dropping into a crude fighting stance that telegraphed his intentions like neon signs. "Or are you just going to kneel there like you're praying to some Buddha statue?" Donnie helped Frank to his feet with one hand while ensuring Ranger could stand with the other. The dog was hurt but mobile, which meant the injury was painful but not life-threatening. Only after confirming both Frank and Ranger were stable did Donnie turn his full attention to Tank. "I'm going to suggest once that you apologize to Mr." Donnie looked questioningly at Frank. "Kowalski," Frank supplied, recognizing the careful courtesy of someone who understood military protocol. "To Mr. Kowalski and his dog," Donnie continued, facing Tank directly for the first time. "After that, we can discuss your behavior." Tank's laughter came out as an ugly bark. "Apologize? To a blind beggar and his mutt? You're even crazier then. You look Jackie Chan." The racial slur hung in the air like a challenge, but Donnie's expression never changed. He stood relaxed with his hands at his sides, showing no obvious martial arts stance, but experienced fighters would have recognized the perfect balance and centered energy of someone completely prepared for violence. Tank circled slightly, trying to use his size advantage to intimidate. "You think you're some kind of tough guy? I eat little guys like you for breakfast." Around them, other commuters had pulled out phones to record what looked like an inevitable beating. Some were backing away to safer distances, others moving closer for better video angles. The morning bus stop had transformed into an impromptu arena. Tank made his first serious mistake, stepping forward to shove Donnie again with even more force. This time, Donnie was ready. Tank's second shove met resistance that defied every law of physics he understood. His hands connected with Donnie's chest, delivering what should have been an overwhelming force that sent the smaller man sprawling. Instead, Tank found himself pushing against something immovable, as if he'd tried to topple a mountain with his bare hands. Donnie's response came in the form of a textbook Wing Chun trap that happened faster than Tank's alcohol-clouded reflexes could process. His hands flowed upward in a fraction of a second, executing a simultaneous lap saw and pack saw that caught Tank's extended arms and redirected his forward momentum with surgical precision. Tank stumbled past Donnie, his own force working against him, confusion replacing aggression as he fought to understand what had just happened. His brain struggled to process how someone half his size had made him look clumsy and off balance without apparent effort. "You're off balance because you're angry," Donnie observed with the calm tone of a professor explaining a basic concept. "Anger makes you predictable. I don't want to hurt you, but I won't let you hurt others." Tank had never been handled so easily by anyone, let alone someone who looked like a middle-aged accountant. His entire identity was built on physical intimidation, on using size and aggression to dominate weaker opponents. Having that foundation cracked by a few gentle movements left him psychologically reeling. What the hell was that? Tank demanded, circling back toward Donnie with newfound wariness. His crude fighting stance had evolved into something more cautious, though still fundamentally flawed by rage and inexperience. "Wing Chun," Donnie replied simply. "You telegraph your intentions through your shoulders. Your stance is too wide, which limits your mobility, and you're fighting with emotion instead of purpose." The educational commentary only further infuriated Tank. Being given martial arts lessons by his intended victim was more humiliating than being defeated outright. His face flushed deeper red as he processed the impossible situation around them. The bus stop crowd had grown. Word was spreading through the morning commuter network that something extraordinary was happening, a real fight, not just urban theater. Phones captured every angle as witnesses realized they might be recording something special. Frank positioned himself and Ranger safely away from the confrontation while remaining close enough to follow the action through sound. Despite his blindness, his military training allowed him to track the engagement through breathing patterns, footwork, and the subtle sounds of contact and movement. "This isn't over, old man," Tank snarled, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "You got lucky once, but luck runs out." Donnie maintained his relaxed posture, hands at his sides, weight perfectly centered. To untrained eyes, he appeared completely unprepared for combat. But Tank was beginning to sense something dangerous. In that casual stance, a readiness that suggested deeper wells of skill than he'd initially recognized. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Donnie said quietly. "But you still have choices. You can apologize and walk away, or you can continue making this situation worse for yourself." Tank's response came in the form of a wild right haymaker thrown, with every ounce of strength and fury his massive frame could generate. The punch carried enough force to knock out a professional heavyweight, but it also carried the fatal flaw of complete predictability. Donnie was already moving before Tank's fist began its journey. The wild haymaker cut through empty air as Donnie demonstrated the core principle that had made Wing Chun legendary: economy of motion combined with perfect timing. He stepped slightly off Tank's attack line, while simultaneously executing a tan saw that deflected the punch and delivered a vertical fist strike to Tank's solar plexus. The technique appeared almost gentle, but Tank's forward momentum combined with Donnie's precise targeting created devastating effect. Tank doubled over, gasping as his diaphragm spasmed and his body struggled to remember how breathing worked. "Centerline theory," Donnie explained calmly as Tank wheezed. "The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. You're swinging around obstacles while I'm going through them." Tank threw a desperate left hook, but Donnie was already inside his guard, using Bill G, thrusting fingers, to strike nerve clusters along Tank's extended arm. The larger man's left side went temporarily numb, his arm dropping uselessly as electrical pain shot from shoulder to fingertips. "That's a nerve strike," Donnie continued his impromptu lesson. "Temporary paralysis. It will wear off in a few minutes, but right now you're fighting with one arm." Tank attempted to grab Donnie in a bear hug, thinking he could use his size advantage in close quarters. But Donnie employed pakta, slap, and hit, breaking the grip attempt while delivering a palm strike to Tank's sternum that sent him stumbling backward. The entire sequence looked like a carefully choreographed dance, with Donnie moving minimally, while Tank stumbled around the improvised arena like a drunk elephant. Every technique Donnie employed followed classical Wing Chun principles: straight-line attacks, trapping hands to control Tank's remaining functional arm, and using the bigger man's aggression against him. "You're telegraphing every move," Donnie observed as Tank reset his stance. "Your weight distribution is wrong, and you're fighting the technique instead of learning from it." Tank's psychological state was deteriorating faster than his physical condition. Being systematically dismantled while receiving polite instruction was more devastating than any beating he'd ever absorbed. His identity as a feared intimidator was crumbling with each failed attack. "Stop talking and fight," Tank roared, launching himself forward in a wild tackle attempt that abandoned all pretense of boxing technique. Donnie waited until Tank committed fully to the takedown, then used a classic Wing Chun throw, lap saw combined with a sweep, that redirected Tank's charging momentum downward and sideways. Tank crashed to the concrete sidewalk with bone-jarring impact, his back hitting the pavement while his lungs expelled every molecule of air. The crowd of witnesses erupted in murmurs and gasps. Several people were live-streaming the encounter, and comments were already pouring in from viewers trying to identify the mysterious martial artist who was systematically dismantling a man twice his size. Tank lay on the concrete, conscious but unable to rise immediately. His chest heaved as he fought to refill his lungs, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain, confusion, and dawning respect for what he'd just experienced. Donnie adjusted his shirt and checked his hands for damage. There was none. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes, and Tank had never landed a single blow despite his size and aggression advantages. "Are you injured?" Donnie asked, approaching Tank with genuine concern. The offer of help to a defeated opponent reflected martial arts philosophy that valued compassion over conquest. Frank called out from his safe position. "Is it over?" "It's over," Donnie confirmed, then looked down at Tank with patient eyes. "Do you understand now why attacking innocent people is wrong?" Tank stared up at the man who had just redefined his understanding of strength, power, and humility. Tank slowly pushed himself up from the concrete, his movements careful and deliberate as he assessed the damage to both his body and his ego. Nothing felt broken, but everything hurt in ways that had nothing to do with physical pain. The systematic dismantling of his worldview was proving more devastating than any bruise. Donnie extended his hand to help Tank stand, a gesture of respect that the larger man stared at for several long seconds. In Tank's experience, fights ended with winners gloating and losers bleeding. This quiet offer of assistance from someone he'd tried to brutalize challenged every assumption he'd built about strength and dominance. After a moment of internal struggle, Tank accepted the help. Donnie's grip was firm but gentle as he assisted the bigger man to his feet, showing no trace of vindictiveness or superiority. "How did you do that?" Tank asked, his voice stripped of its earlier aggression. The question came out as genuine confusion rather than challenge. "I mean, I'm twice your size. I should have crushed you." "Years of training," Donnie replied simply, releasing Tank's hand once he was stable. "But more importantly, training in why we fight. You attacked an innocent man and his service animal. That was wrong." Tank looked over at Frank, who was gently examining Ranger while speaking softly to calm the injured dog. For the first time, Tank truly saw his victims, not as targets for his frustration, but as real people with dignity and worth. The shame hit him like a physical blow. I didn't know he was military," Tank mumbled, the inadequacy of the excuse obvious even to himself. "That doesn't make it right," Donnie observed without judgment. "But understanding is the first step toward better choices." Frank approached with Ranger walking carefully beside him. The golden retriever was moving normally but showed tenderness in his left side. Frank's weathered face carried concern for his companion mixed with gratitude toward his unexpected defender. "Thank you," Frank said, extending his hand toward Donnie's voice. "I'm Frank Kowalski. This is Ranger." "Donnie," came the simple reply as they shook hands. There was immediate mutual respect between the two men, recognition of shared values despite their different backgrounds. "Vietnam?" Donnie asked, noting Frank's bearing and the practiced way he handled stress. "1st Infantry Division, 1968 to 1970, Frank confirmed. "You have military experience?" "Film work with military consultants," Donnie explained. "I've worked with many veterans in my career. I have deep respect for your service." Tank listened to this exchange with growing understanding of what he'd really done. He hadn't just attacked a random old man. He'd assaulted a decorated veteran who'd served his country with honor. The weight of that realization pressed down on him like a physical force. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air. Someone in the crowd had called 911, and Sacramento police were responding to reports of assault and fighting. Tank didn't try to run. Something in Donnie's example had awakened a dormant sense of responsibility. "I'm sorry," Tank said suddenly, the words directed at Frank. "I was wrong to hurt you and your dog. There's no excuse for what I did." Frank turned toward Tank's voice, his unseeing eyes somehow managing to convey both forgiveness and firm resolve. "Apologies are a start, but actions matter more than words." Two patrol cars pulled up to the bus stop, officers Bradley and Santos emerging to assess the situation. Multiple witnesses immediately began providing statements supporting Donnie's self-defense claim and Tank's unprovoked attack on both Frank and Ranger. As Tank was being questioned by the officers, he made no attempt to deny his actions or blame others. The transformation from aggressive bully to repentant defendant was so complete that even the arresting officers seemed surprised by his cooperation. But something else was happening that would prove far more significant than a simple assault. Case. Detective Rita Vasquez arrived in an unmarked sedan just as Tank was being placed in the patrol car. At 45, she carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone who'd spent 2 decades solving problems that others couldn't handle. Her presence at what should have been a routine assault call raised immediate questions. "Officers," she addressed Bradley and Santos, "I need to speak with the victim, Mr. Kowalski, regarding an ongoing investigation." Frank's name had caught her attention during the radio dispatch. For 3 months, Detective Vasquez had been tracking a series of missing persons cases involving veterans, and Frank Kowalski's file had crossed her desk twice in recent weeks. Hearing his name connected to a violent incident triggered investigative instincts honed by years of connecting seemingly unrelated dots. She approached Frank with professional courtesy that quickly shifted to genuine concern. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm Detective Vasquez with Sacramento PD. I've been trying to reach you about some questions regarding missing veterans in the area." Frank's expression showed surprise mixed with worry. "Missing veterans? I haven't heard anything about that from the VA or Veteran Services." 7 men in the past 6 months, Detective Vasquez explained, her voice lowering to avoid alarming other witnesses. "All of them older, living alone, financially vulnerable. Your name came up in connection with some of their cases." Meanwhile, Tank was making a brief phone call from the patrol car before being transported to booking. The conversation was quiet, but urgent. "Yeah, it's me. We got a problem. That old soldier has friends now. No, I couldn't handle it. Look, just send someone else, okay?" Detective Vasquez noticed the call but couldn't make out the words. However, her investigative experience told her that Tank's assault on Frank might not have been random street violence. The timing, the specific targeting of a vulnerable veteran, and now a mysterious phone call suggested deeper connections. After Tank was taken away, Detective Vasquez shared her concerns with Donnie and Frank. She explained that the missing veterans all fit similar profiles. Older men receiving disability benefits, living in low-income housing, with military combat experience, but current vulnerabilities that made them easy targets. "The pattern suggests someone is specifically hunting veterans," she continued. Each disappearance was preceded by a period of harassment, anonymous letters, confrontations with strangers, vandalism, or attacks on pets and service animals. Frank's face paled as he processed this information. Reaching into his canvas messenger bag, he pulled out a manila envelope containing several letters. "I've been getting these for the past 2 weeks. They mention a debt I supposedly owe and threaten consequences if I don't respond." Detective Vasquez examined the letters with growing alarm. The language was sophisticated, not crude street threats, but psychological manipulation designed to isolate and frighten the recipient. References to obligations to fellow warriors and honoring service commitments suggested whoever wrote them understood military psychology. "Mr. Yen," Detective Vasquez addressed Donnie, "I think what happened today wasn't random. Someone may have sent Tank to provoke an incident with Frank. The fact that you intervened might have saved Mr. Kowalski from disappearing like the others." Donnie studied the detective's face, reading the genuine concern and professional competence behind her words. His martial arts training included the ability to assess people's character quickly, and Detective Vasquez registered as someone committed to protecting others. "What do you need us to do?" Donnie asked simply. "Frank can't stay at his usual residence tonight," Detective Vasquez replied. "And Mr. Yen, You may be in danger now, too. Tank's phone call suggests he was reporting to someone about this incident. As if summoned by her words, Donnie's cell phone rang. The caller ID showed his Aunt Lily's number, but something in the quality of the ring suggested urgency. Donnie. Aunt Lily's voice carried worry beneath her usual strength. There have been strangers asking questions about you in the neighborhood. I think you should come home quickly. The bus stop incident was expanding into something much larger and more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Aunt Lily's modest two-story house in Sacramento's Chinatown district stood like a fortress of memory and tradition. Built in the 1940s, it bore the careful maintenance of someone who understood that small things, properly tended, could last forever. The front garden overflowed with vegetables and medicinal herbs that served both practical and cultural purposes, bok choy growing beside ginseng, tomatoes sharing space with chrysanthemum. Donnie arrived carrying groceries and Frank's canvas bag, having insisted on stopping at the market despite the morning's violence. Normalcy, he'd learned, was often the best response to chaos. Frank had gone directly to the veterinary clinic with Detective Vasquez to have Ranger examined, leaving Donnie to process the day's events in the sanctuary of family. Aunt Lily opened the door before he could knock. Her sharp eyes had spotted him from the kitchen window. At 78, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd learned to waste nothing, not motion, not words, not opportunities to care for. Family, you've been fighting, she observed in Cantonese, switching to their childhood language for serious conversations. I can always tell. Your shoulders carry tension differently after violence. She examined his hands while he removed his shoes, a house rule that had never changed in 40 years. His knuckles showed slight swelling, barely visible but obvious to someone who'd tended his injuries since he was 12. It wasn't a fight I chose, Donnie replied, also in Cantonese. But it was one I couldn't avoid. Over lunch preparation, Aunt Lily shared her growing concerns about the neighborhood. Strangers had been approaching elderly residents with questions about Donnie, his schedule, his habits, his relationships. Local businesses reported being pressured to provide information about customers, particularly anyone associated with the Chin family. Mrs. Wong from the herb shop says 2 men came asking about your visits, Lily continued, applying traditional liniment to Donnie's hands. They claimed to be from some veterans organization, but their questions weren't about veterans. They wanted to know when you come here, how long you stay, who you talk to. The herbal medicine stung pleasantly as it penetrated small cuts and bruises Donnie hadn't noticed during the confrontation. Aunt Lily's healing knowledge came from generations of women who'd learned to care for family without access to Western medicine. These Tank person was looking for your Frank specifically, she continued. The letters, the attack on the dog, these are not random acts. Someone is hunting, and now they know you will interfere with their plans. Donnie described the morning's events while Aunt Lily prepared their meal with practiced efficiency. Her insights came from decades of surviving in a community where people looked out for each other, where individual problems quickly became collective concerns. You remember what I taught you about responsibility? She asked, ladling soup into hand-painted bowls that had survived 3 moves and 40 years of daily use. When you have the ability to protect others, silence becomes complicity. Donnie recited the childhood lesson. But wisdom chooses when and how to act. Lily completed the teaching. She could see that Donnie was already committed to helping Frank, and she supported this decision while recognizing the dangers it would bring. His cell phone rang as they sat down to eat. Detective Vasquez's voice carried both relief and new concerns. Ranger has bruised ribs, but no internal damage. Frank is staying at a safe house tonight. But Mr. Yen, we need to meet tomorrow morning. I found connections that suggest this goes much deeper than random veteran harassment. Detective Vasquez arrived at Aunt Lily's house at 8 a.m. carrying a thick manila file that suggested weeks of methodical investigation. She accepted Lily's offer of tea with the respect for elders that immediately earned the older woman's approval, a small gesture that spoke to character and cultural awareness. The kitchen table became a command center as Vasquez spread out photographs, police reports, and detailed timelines that painted a disturbing picture of systematic predation. 7 veterans had vanished over 6 months, each disappearance following an identical pattern of escalating harassment designed to isolate and terrorize. Look at the methodology, Vasquez explained, pointing to a carefully constructed chart. First, they gather intelligence, medical records, financial information, family connections. Then they initiate contact through official-seeming channels, usually offering assistance or benefits. The missing veterans ranged in age from 60 to 75, all living alone or with minimal family support. Their military records showed combat experience, infantry, Marines, special forces, but their current circumstances reflected the harsh reality of veteran life: disability benefits, low-income housing, and the daily struggle of men whose skills were valued in war but forgotten in peace. When the veterans refused the initial offers, Vasquez continued, the harassment begins. Anonymous letters, vandalism, confrontations with strangers. They target pets and service animals specifically because it's both cruel and effective, attacking something the veteran loves while demonstrating power. Frank's case fit the pattern perfectly. The letters in his possession used language designed to trigger military guilt and obligation, references to debts of service, and responsibilities to fellow warriors that exploited the veteran mindset of duty and honor. The federal investigation hit a wall 3 weeks ago, Vasquez admitted. FBI suspects human trafficking, but they can't locate where the missing veterans are being held or identify who's running the operation. No witnesses, no crime scenes. The men simply vanish. Donnie studied the photographs of missing veterans, each face telling a story of service and sacrifice followed by abandonment. Why Frank specifically? What made him a target? Vasquez pulled out Frank's military record, obtained with his permission during the previous night's debriefing. Decorated infantry soldier, specialized training in reconnaissance and survival. Despite his blindness, he retains knowledge and instincts that would be valuable to certain criminal enterprises. The scope of the operation became clear as Vasquez revealed financial connections, shell companies, money transfers, and a sophisticated network designed to identify and exploit vulnerable veterans throughout Northern California. Someone with significant resources was running a professional operation. Tank's phone call yesterday has been traced to a burner phone, Vasquez continued. The signal bounced off 3 towers before going dead, but it confirms there are others involved. By protecting Frank, you've painted a target on yourself. Aunt Lily had listened to the briefing with sharp attention, her experience in tight-knit communities providing insights that official investigations might miss. They will come after Donnie now, she observed. But they will also try to use me and Frank to force his cooperation. Her assessment proved prophetic when Frank arrived with Ranger, both showing signs of a difficult night despite police protection. The golden retriever wore a protective vest around his ribs, but moved normally, his training and loyalty intact despite yesterday's trauma. I remember details about the letters that might be important, Frank announced, settling carefully into a kitchen chair while Ranger took his customary position nearby. Specific phrases, the paper quality, postmarks that might help track the source. But as Frank began sharing these details, Detective Vasquez's phone rang with news that would transform their investigation from reactive to urgent. 2 more veterans disappeared last night. Thomas Mitchell, 64, former Marine. Robert Chun, 67, Army medic. Both fit the profile exactly, and both had been receiving similar letters. The criminal organization wasn't slowing down. They were accelerating their operations, possibly in response to the previous day's confrontation. Frank's apartment building stood as a monument to bureaucratic indifference. 3 stories of subsidized housing that warehoused society's forgotten rather than truly helping them heal. The hallways smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, but Frank had made his small space into something approaching home through military discipline and stubborn dignity. Detective Vasquez unlocked Frank's door using keys he'd provided, revealing an apartment organized with mathematical precision. Every item had a specific location that allowed Frank to navigate independently. Furniture positioned to create clear pathways, kitchen supplies arranged by frequency of use, important documents filed in accessible containers. The threatening letters occupied a manila envelope in Frank's kitchen drawer, right where muscle memory expected to find them. 5 letters total, received over 2 weeks, each escalating in psychological pressure while maintaining the sophisticated language that suggested professional composition rather than street-level intimidation. "Look at the letterhead, Detective," Vasquez observed, examining the documents under Frank's reading lamp. "Veterans Support Services, it looks completely legitimate. Professional printing, official-style formatting, even a phone number and mailing address." Frank's enhanced spatial awareness, developed to compensate for his blindness, had noticed details that sighted people might miss. "The paper has a specific texture, expensive stock, not office supply store material. And whoever wrote these knows things about my service record that aren't in public files." Donnie studied the letter's language while Frank shared his analysis. References to fellow warriors, honoring obligations, and debts of service demonstrated sophisticated understanding of military psychology, the words chosen specifically to trigger veteran guilt and loyalty. "They're not trying to scare me into paying money," Frank explained, his military training and psychological operations providing crucial insight. "They're trying to make me feel guilty and isolated, so I'll accept help from the wrong people." Their investigation led to the VA Medical Center where Frank received services, a sprawling complex that served thousands of veterans throughout Northern California. The staff was helpful but revealed disturbing information that validated Detective Vasquez's worst suspicions. Nancy Rodriguez, a Veteran Services Coordinator, showed them credentials used by supposed representatives from Veteran Support Services. The documents appeared completely official, but the address was a mail drop service and the phone number connected to an automated answering system. "They've been accessing veteran records for months," Rodriguez admitted reluctantly. "The credentials looked legitimate, and they claimed to be offering additional assistance to veterans in need. We had no reason to suspect fraud." The scope of the identity theft became clear as Rodriguez revealed the systematic nature of the record access. Someone had been mining veteran databases for specific profiles: combat veterans with current vulnerabilities, men whose military skills might be valuable, but whose circumstances made them easy targets to as they left the VA center. Donnie's trained awareness detected surveillance. A dark sedan with 2 occupants had followed them from Frank's apartment, maintaining professional distance while clearly tracking their movements. Rather than confront the tail directly, Donnie tested their watchers by taking an indirect route. The surveillance confirmed Detective Vasquez's theory. Frank was still being actively targeted, and their investigation had made Donnie and the detective targets as well. Someone was planning their next move while monitoring every step of the official response. Back at Frank's apartment, they found evidence that someone had been inside during their absence. Nothing was stolen, but items had been moved slightly, just enough for Frank's enhanced spatial awareness to detect the intrusion. Ranger was agitated, picking up scents that shouldn't be present in his secure environment. "They're not just watching anymore," Frank observed grimly. "They're preparing for something." Detective Vasquez's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop investigating or join the missing." The hunters had become the hunted, and time was running out. The knock on Frank's apartment door came at exactly 2 p.m., polite, professional, with the measured rhythm of someone accustomed to being welcomed rather than feared. Through the peephole, Frank saw a well-dressed man in his 50s holding official-looking credentials and wearing the kind of smile that politicians practiced in mirrors. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm Vincent Torres from Veterans Support Services. I understand you've had some difficulties recently, and I'd like to offer our assistance." Vincent Torino had shed his criminal identity like a snake shedding skin, presenting himself as everything Tank wasn't: educated, sympathetic, and genuinely concerned about veteran welfare. His expensive suit spoke of legitimate success, his credentials appeared flawless, and his knowledge of Frank's situation seemed to come from official channels. Frank, having been warned by Detective Vasquez, remained suspicious but played along to gather intelligence. "Please, come in. Though, I should mention I have friends visiting." Torino's smile never wavered as he entered the apartment and spotted Donnie sitting calmly in Frank's reading chair. If he recognized the man who defeated Tank, he gave no indication, just professional courtesy towards someone he assumed was family or a caregiver. "Mr. Torres, this is my friend Donnie," Frank offered, watching for reactions through enhanced hearing that could detect subtle changes in breathing, heart rate, and vocal tension. "Pleasure to meet you," Torino replied, extending his hand to Donnie with practice charm. I hope you don't mind if I speak with Mr. Kowalski about some opportunities that might be beneficial to him. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in psychological manipulation disguised as social work. Torino expressed concern about the unfortunate incident at the bus stop, offered assistance with legal fees and medical bills for Ranger, and even suggested temporary housing in a safer environment where Frank wouldn't face street harassment. Our organization specializes in helping veterans who've served with distinction but find themselves in challenging circumstances, Torino explained, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who genuinely cared. We have programs that allow veterans to earn supplemental income through security consulting, essentially using their military training to provide protection services for clients who appreciate authentic experience. Frank recognized the sophisticated recruitment pitch beneath the helpful facade. Torino knew specific details about Frank's financial situation, his military service record, and even his medical history. Information that proved access to confidential databases far beyond what any legitimate social service organization should possess. The work is mostly ceremonial, Torino continued, providing a sense of purpose and adequate compensation for men who've given so much to their country. The veterans in our program are very satisfied with the arrangement. When Frank expressed hesitation, Torino's demeanor shifted with surgical precision, still friendly, but with an undertone of urgency that suggested limited availability. Opportunities like this don't come along often, Mr. Kowalski. The other veterans who've joined our program found it quite rewarding, both personally and financially. Donnie observed the entire interaction with the enhanced awareness of someone trained to read people through microscopic behavioral changes. Torino's body language, speech patterns, and eye movements revealed sophisticated deception, someone comfortable with manipulation but careful enough to avoid obvious threats. I appreciate the offer, Frank replied carefully, but I'd need time to consider such a major decision. Maybe you could leave some information I could review. Torino's smile remained perfect as he placed a business card on Frank's coffee table. Of course, take all the time you need, though I should mention that our current openings may be filled soon. I'll call tomorrow to see if you have any questions. After Torino left, the apartment felt somehow contaminated by his presence. Frank immediately shared his concerns with Donnie. That man knows things about me that aren't in any VA file. He's been watching me for weeks, maybe months. The business card revealed an address that would later prove to be another mail drop, a phone number routing to an answering service, and credentials that looked completely legitimate but represented sophisticated fraud. Detective Vasquez arrived 20 minutes later, just as Torino's sedan disappeared around the corner. When they described the encounter, her expression became grim with recognition. Same pattern used on all the missing veterans, she confirmed. Friendly approach, followed by escalating pressure, followed by disappearance when they refused to cooperate. Frank couldn't stay at his apartment that night. They all understood that much. But as they prepared to leave for the safe house, Detective Vasquez received a call that changed everything. Frank, you can't go to the safe house. It's been compromised. And Mr. Yen, I think both of you are in immediate danger. The Chinatown neighborhood that had sheltered 3 generations of the Chun family transformed into a battlefield at precisely 6 p.m. Tank arrived with 3 companions, all cut from the same cloth of muscle and malice that had made him Torino's preferred enforcer before his humiliating defeat at the bus stop. Aunt Lily spotted them first from her kitchen window, recognizing the predatory swagger that marked dangerous men in any culture. She immediately called her neighbor Mrs. Wong, initiating a communication network that had protected the community through decades of external threats. Donnie, she said quietly, finding him reviewing Detective Vasquez's files at the kitchen table. We have visitors who aren't here for dim sum. Tank's crew began their intimidation campaign with calculated precision. They vandalized the Golden Dragon herb shop where Aunt Lily bought her medicines, shattering windows and overturning displays while shouting demands for information about the old Chinese guy who thinks he's Bruce Lee. The elderly shop owner, Mr. Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, cowered behind his counter as the thugs destroyed 40 years of careful inventory. Traditional medicines scattered across. Broken glass, centuries-old remedies mixed with modern debris in a symphony of cultural destruction. Where does he live? Tank demanded, grabbing the terrified shopkeeper by his shirt. When does he visit? Who does he talk to? The community response was swift but careful. Elderly residents closed shops early, locked doors, and activated phone trees that spread warnings faster than official emergency systems. But they were mostly septuagenarians and small business owners, people with more courage than muscle, more wisdom than weapons. Several community members approached Aunt Lily's house, their faces showing the weight of impossible choices. "Mrs. Chun," spoke David Liu, who ran the neighborhood watch. "Maybe Donnie should leave temporarily. These men are asking questions, making threats. People are scared." Aunt Lily's response came with the steel that had carried her through immigration, discrimination, and decades of building a life in a country that didn't always welcome her presence. "We don't abandon family, and we don't bow to bullies. If he runs now, they'll know they can terrorize anyone in this community." Donnie prepared for confrontation with the methodical calm of someone who'd faced worse odds in controlled environments. But this wasn't a movie set with safety coordinators and predetermined outcomes. This was real violence threatening real people he cared about. The narrow alley behind Aunt Lily's house became an arena when Tank's crew cornered Donnie during his evening walk. The confined space negated their numbers advantage while playing to Wing Chun's strengths. Close-quarters combat, where technique mattered more than size. Tank had learned from their previous encounter, bringing baseball bats and brass knuckles to supplement raw muscle. But weapons in untrained hands often became liabilities, and Donnie's film experience included extensive work with prop weapons and their real-world counterparts. "This time we're ready for your kung fu bullshit," Tank snarled, hefting a Louisville slugger like a club. "Preparation and readiness aren't the same thing," Donnie replied calmly, centering his breathing as four armed men approached in the gathering dusk. The fight that followed would become legend in Sacramento's Chinatown, the night wisdom defeated force, and one man's courage protected an entire community. The abandoned warehouse district on Sacramento's industrial outskirts resembled a graveyard of economic dreams. Massive concrete shells that had once housed manufacturing jobs now serving as monuments to globalization's casualties. Detective Vasquez and Donnie conducted their surveillance from a rented sedan, watching the building complex that financial records suggested belonged to a web of shell companies connected to Torino's operation. Dawn light revealed fresh tire tracks in the dusty parking areas, security cameras that seemed inconsistent with vacant buildings, and power lines carrying electricity to structures that should have been dark and empty. The warehouses appeared abandoned to casual observation, but trained eyes detected signs of recent occupation and ongoing activity. 3 buildings in the complex, Detective Vasquez noted, using binoculars to study the layout. Main warehouse, smaller storage facility, and what looks like an administrative building, all supposedly vacant for 18 months, but someone's paying for utilities and security systems. Donnie's film industry background included working with military technical advisors who'd taught him reconnaissance techniques for authentic combat scenes. He identified potential entry points, security blind spots, and escape routes with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that movie mistakes could be res-hot, but real-world errors were permanent. "I can get inside during the day shift," Donnie offered, studying the guards' patrol patterns. "Your investigation needs evidence, and that building contains answers we won't find in public records." Using martial arts agility combined with urban parkour techniques learned for film work, Donnie infiltrated the warehouse complex during the afternoon lull when activity was minimal. What he discovered inside contradicted every assumption about simple criminal enterprises. The main warehouse had been converted into living quarters that were essentially prison cells, small rooms with locks on the outside, minimal furniture, and the kind of institutional atmosphere that spoke to systematic dehumanization. Personal items scattered throughout the rooms told stories of the men who'd been held there. Military dog tags, veteran disability cards, photographs of families and service units. The smaller building contained training equipment, medical supplies, and educational materials that suggested people were being conditioned for specific purposes. Boxing equipment, tactical training aids, and psychological manipulation resources painted a picture of systematic preparation rather than simple imprisonment. Most disturbing was the administrative building, where Donnie found detailed files, on dozens of veterans throughout Northern California. Each file contained military records, psychological profiles, financial information, and vulnerability assessments that read like targeting packages for predators shopping for specific prey. The scope of the operation became clear as Donnie photographed evidence with his cell phone. This wasn't small-time crime. It was sophisticated human trafficking with resources that suggested significant financial backing and professional organization. Among the personal items, Donnie found military identification belonging to the 7 missing veterans, along with belongings from others who weren't in Detective Vasquez's files. The operation had been running longer and claiming more victims than anyone suspected. But the most chilling discovery was a planning document outlining expansion into other states, with Sacramento serving as a pilot program for a national operation, targeting vulnerable veterans. The criminals saw military heroes as commodities to be harvested and sold to wealthy clients seeking authentic entertainment. As Donnie prepared to leave with his evidence, he realized the warehouse complex was larger than initially thought. Multiple buildings served different functions in what amounted to a processing facility for human trafficking. Intake, conditioning, training, and something called final deployment that suggested a permanent destination he didn't want to imagine. The intelligence gathering mission had been successful, but it also revealed the true scale of what they were fighting. This wasn't just about saving Frank or catching Tank. It was about dismantling an organization that viewed military heroes as inventory in a business plan. Detective Vasquez's radio crackled with urgent news as Donnie returned to their surveillance position. We've got federal backup mobilizing, but they need 6 hours minimum. And Torino just made contact with Frank again. He's escalating the timeline. The rescue operation launched at 10 p.m. under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for what was technically an illegal law enforcement action. Detective Vasquez had assembled a team of trusted allies, FBI agent Jennifer Walsh and 2 Sacramento SWAT officers who understood that sometimes justice couldn't wait for official authorization. That Donnie's reconnaissance had provided detailed intelligence about the warehouse complex, guard positions, entry points, and the location of imprisoned veterans. The plan was surgical. Create a distraction at the main entrance while Donnie infiltrated through the rear facility to locate and extract the victims. Remember, this is off the books until we have evidence in hand, Agent Walsh warned as they reviewed the assault plan. If we're wrong about what's inside those buildings, our careers are over. If we're right, we're saving lives that the system has failed to protect. Donnie's approach to the rear building utilized every skill acquired through decades of martial arts training and film work. He moved through shadows with the fluid silence of someone who understood that visibility meant failure, that sound meant death. That patience was the difference between rescue and catastrophe. The residential section of the complex contained 5 of the 7 missing veterans, alive but showing signs of systematic abuse designed to break their spirit and resistance. Thomas Mitchell, the former Marine who disappeared 3 days earlier, was conscious but malnourished. Robert Chun, the Army medic, showed evidence of forced medical treatment that suggested chemical conditioning. We're getting you out of here, Donnie whispered as he began unlocking cell doors with tools Detective Vasquez had provided. But I need you to stay quiet and follow my lead. The rescued veterans, despite their ordeal, retained enough military discipline to organize quickly and efficiently once they understood that salvation had arrived. They formed up behind Donnie with the automatic precision of men who'd spent lifetimes following orders and protecting each other. Johnson and Martinez are in the medical facility, whispered former Staff Sergeant Williams, the oldest of the group. They've been drugged, but they're alive. Rodriguez is in the training building. They've been trying to break him for weeks. The extraction proceeded smoothly, too smoothly. Donnie's martial arts training had taught him to trust instincts that screamed warnings when situations felt wrong. As they moved through the complex gathering the remaining victims, everything was going exactly according to plan. Detective Vasquez and her team had successfully infiltrated the administrative building, gathering crucial evidence, including financial records, client lists, and video recordings of illegal activities. The paper trail would be sufficient to prosecute Torino's entire organization and expose the wealthy clients who funded veteran exploitation. All 5 missing veterans were successfully extracted, and moved to secure vehicles outside the complex. Medical personnel were standing by to provide treatment, while FBI agents prepared to process the evidence that would dismantle a human trafficking network spanning multiple states. The operation was a complete success, which was exactly why. Donnie knew something was catastrophically wrong. This was too easy, he told Detective Vasquez as they prepared to call an official backup. Professional criminals don't leave their most sensitive operations this lightly guarded. It feels like his phone rang with an unknown number. Detective Vasquez's phone rang simultaneously. When they answered, they found themselves listening to Vincent Torino's voice, calm and confident despite the fact that his operation had just been raided. "Congratulations on your successful rescue mission," Torino said smoothly. "You've recovered 5 veterans and gathered evidence of crimes that will put some of my associates in prison for decades. Very impressive work." Detective Vasquez realized with growing horror that Torino was too calm, too prepared for what should have been a devastating surprise attack. "But I'm afraid you've been operating under some false assumptions," Torino continued. "Detective Vasquez, you might want to look more carefully at your partner." The woman standing beside Donnie wasn't Detective Rita Vasquez, it was Detective Maria Santos, who'd been feeding information to Torino throughout the entire investigation. The underground facility revealed itself as Torino's true masterpiece, a converted subway tunnel system that predated Sacramento's modern urban development. Detective Santos led Donnie deeper into the concrete maze while explaining how thoroughly they'd been manipulated from the very beginning. The warehouse was bait, Santos revealed, her professional facade finally dropping to show the corrupt opportunist beneath. "We let you find it, let you rescue those 5 veterans, even let you gather evidence that will convict some of Torino's competitors. Everyone wins except the people who matter." The real Detective Vasquez was already imprisoned in the underground complex, having discovered Santos's corruption weeks earlier. Her investigation into missing veterans had been systematically undermined by her own partner, who'd been feeding Torino intelligence about law enforcement activities while helping identify vulnerable targets. The tunnels opened into a sophisticated facility that made the warehouse operation look amateur by comparison. Professional fighting arenas with stadium lighting and video equipment, medical facilities that could handle serious injuries, and living quarters that housed dozens of veterans in various stages of psychological conditioning. "Welcome to the real business," Torino greeted Donnie personally as Santos delivered her captive to the underground command center. The warehouse was small-time housing and initial conditioning. "This is where the real money gets made," Torino explained his operation with the pride of someone who'd built something magnificent. Wealthy clients throughout the world paid enormous sums to watch authentic warriors, veterans with real combat experience, fight in brutal matches that combined legitimate martial arts with desperate survival instincts. "The psychological appeal is irresistible," Torino continued, gesturing toward video monitors showing previous fights. "These aren't actors or professional fighters. They're genuine military heroes fighting for their lives. The authenticity is what commands premium prices." Frank and Aunt Lily were brought into the viewing area, both of them bound but unharmed. Torino had used them as leverage to ensure Donnie's cooperation, but their presence also served to demonstrate the scope of his power and the futility of resistance. "Your choice is simple," Torino explained. "Participate in our entertainment program, and your friends remain safe. Refuse, and they join the other veterans who've learned that heroism has a price in the real world." The real Detective Vasquez emerged from the prisoner holding area, having been captured during her investigation into Santos's corruption. Her presence confirmed that law enforcement had been compromised from the beginning, that every move they'd made had been anticipated and countered. "The federal backup you're expecting?" Santos smiled coldly. "They're raiding the warehouse facility where they'll find evidence of crimes that lead nowhere near this location. By the time they realize they've been misdirected, this operation will have moved to our secondary facility in Mexico." Donnie assessed his situation with the cold clarity that martial arts training had burned into his soul. He was surrounded by armed guards in an underground facility with no backup and no easy escape routes. Frank and Aunt Lily's lives depended on his cooperation with criminals who viewed human suffering as entertainment. But Torino had made one crucial error in his calculations. He'd underestimated what happened when you trapped a master of Wing Chun with the people he loved most in the world. The first fight begins in 1 hour, Torino announced. You'll face Marcus Rivera, a former Marine who's been in our program for 4 months. Win, and your friends eat dinner. Lose, and they learn why cooperation is always the better choice. The trap had closed perfectly, but Donnie was about to demonstrate why cornered warriors were the most dangerous opponents of all. The underground fighting arena possessed the professional polish of Madison Square Garden, crossed with the sinister atmosphere of a medieval dungeon. Stadium lighting illuminated a regulation-sized cage surrounded by video cameras capturing every angle for wealthy clients streaming the violence from mansions and penthouses around the world. Donnie was escorted to a preparation cell that had housed dozens of veterans before him. The walls bore scratched names, unit designations, and desperate messages from men who discovered that military service meant nothing to predators who saw honor as weakness to be exploited. Welcome to the main event, Torino announced through speakers that carried his voice throughout the facility. Tonight's entertainment features a legendary martial artist forced to fight for the lives of his loved ones. Exactly the kind of authentic desperation our clients pay premium prices to witness. Through the cell's reinforced window, Donnie could see Frank and Aunt Lily in a viewing area designed to maximize psychological pressure. Both were unharmed, but clearly being held as leverage to ensure his cooperation with the twisted entertainment Torino had created. Marcus Rivera was brought to the adjacent cell. A former Marine whose 4 months in Torino's program had left him physically capable but psychologically shattered. At 34, he should have been in his prime, but his eyes carried the hollow desperation of someone who'd learned that survival sometimes required abandoning everything he'd once believed about honor and brotherhood. I don't want to fight you, Rivera whispered through the cell wall, but they have my daughter. If I don't fight, if I don't make it look real, they'll hurt her. I'm sorry. Then we'll make it look real, Donnie replied quietly. But neither of us has to get seriously injured. Trust me. The arena preparation included medical examinations designed to verify that both fighters were capable of delivering the entertainment value Torino's clients expected. The facility's doctor, a legitimate physician whose medical license had been revoked for ethical violations, confirmed that both men were healthy enough for extended physical engagement. Torino personally briefed Donnie on the rules, which were designed to maximize spectacle rather than ensure fair competition. Fights continued until one participant couldn't continue. Medical intervention was minimal, and the crowd's reaction determined whether matches ended in victory or something more permanent. Our clients aren't interested in quick, technical victories, Torino explained with the enthusiasm of someone discussing a successful business model. They want to see authentic warriors pushed to their absolute limits. They want to witness what happens when civilized men are stripped of everything except the will to survive. The wealthy viewers logging into the secure video feed represented the worst aspects of human nature. People with enough money to indulge any fantasy, including the debasement of military heroes for their personal entertainment. Chat functions allowed them to comment on the action and even request specific types of violence. As Donnie was led toward the arena, he passed other cells containing veterans in various stages of psychological conditioning. Some had been broken completely. Others retained enough spirit to nod acknowledgement to a fellow warrior entering what might be his final battle. Remember, Torino's voice followed him down the corridor. Your performance determines whether your friends live or die. Make it memorable. The arena doors opened to reveal 500 square feet of professional fighting space, surrounded by cameras that would broadcast his potential death to an audience of millionaires who viewed human suffering as premium entertainment. But they were about to discover that cornering a Wing Chun master was like trapping lightning in a bottle. The underground arena erupted with artificial excitement as wealthy clients logged into their secure feeds, their chat comments scrolling across monitors that displayed the global reach of Torino's twisted enterprise. From Tokyo penthouses to London mansions, the world's elite prepared to watch authentic military heroes destroy each other for their amusement. Marcus Rivera entered the cage with the reluctant determination of someone who'd learned that survival sometimes required participating in your own dehumanization. For months of psychological conditioning had taught him that resistance meant punishment for his family, but cooperation offered the slim hope of eventual freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, Torino's voice boomed through speakers while his image appeared on video feeds worldwide. Tonight, we present authentic combat between two genuine warriors. No actors, no stage choreography, just desperate men fighting for the most primitive motivation of all, survival. Donnie stepped into the arena carrying himself with the fluid balance that marked decades of Wing Chun mastery, but his eyes held compassion rather than aggression. Rivera had been victimized by the same system that now threatened Frank and Aunt Lily. They were allies forced into artificial conflict by criminals who profited from authentic suffering. The fight began with Rivera throwing a technically sound combination that demonstrated his Marine Corps training, but Donnie recognized the subtle hesitation that indicated his opponent's reluctance to cause real harm. Using Wing Chun's defensive principles, Donnie redirected Rivera's attacks while making the defensive movements appear like desperate survival techniques. Centerline defense, Donnie whispered during a clinch, using their apparent struggle to communicate tactical information. Make it look like you're hurting me, but aim for points that can absorb impact without permanent damage. The audience of wealthy sadists cheered as what appeared to be brutal combat unfolded in the arena. Donnie's Wing Chun techniques allowed him to control the pace and intensity, while Rivera's Marine training provided realistic-looking offense that satisfied viewers expecting authentic military violence. "They want spectacle," Rivera whispered back, throwing a punch that looked devastating but struck Donnie's forearm in a way that created sound without serious injury. 4 months of watching other fights. They get bored if it's too technical or ends too quickly. The performance required perfect coordination between two warriors who'd never trained together but shared the military understanding that mission success sometimes demanded personal sacrifice. They created the appearance of escalating desperation, while actually protecting each other from the worst violence. Donnie demonstrated Wing Chun's simultaneous attack and defense principles in ways that appeared desperate but were actually precisely controlled. Each technique looked like a fighter being pushed to his limits, while actually showcasing the art's efficiency and economy of motion. Meanwhile, Rivera used his Marine training to make every movement appear authentically military, giving the wealthy viewers the genuine warrior combat they'd paid premium prices to witness. His attacks carried the visual impact of lethal intent while avoiding the anatomical targets that would cause permanent damage. The chat comments from viewing clients revealed their bloodthirsty enthusiasm for what they believed was authentic military combat. Requests for specific types of violence scrolled past, while betting pools formed around whether the older fighter would survive the younger veteran's assault. After 15 minutes of carefully choreographed violence, both men showed the fatigue that satisfied audience expectations for authentic warrior combat. Blood from minor cuts created visual impact, while strategic positioning ensured that cameras captured angles suggesting more serious damage than actually occurred. But Torino's voice cut through their performance with an announcement that changed everything. "Excellent entertainment, gentlemen. However, our clients are requesting a more decisive conclusion. The fight continues until one of you cannot get up." The psychological game had shifted. They could no longer protect each other while satisfying the audience's bloodlust. Someone would have to lose convincingly enough to end the match, or both would be forced to continue until one was genuinely incapacitated. Rivera's eyes met Donnie's across the arena, both men understanding that their careful cooperation was about to become impossible. The realization that their performance had to end with genuine incapacitation transformed the arena dynamic from controlled cooperation to desperate strategy. Rivera's whispered words during their next clinch carried the weight of military brotherhood. "I can take more punishment than you can probably give without killing me. Let me go down hard." "No," Donnie replied, using a Wing Chun trap to control Rivera's arms while appearing to struggle for dominance. "There's another way, but I need you to trust me completely." During their months of imprisonment, Rivera had watched other veterans broken by Torino's system, men who'd entered as proud warriors and left as hollow shells programmed for violence. The psychological conditioning was designed to eliminate hope, to make cooperation seem like the only path to survival. But Donnie's presence had awakened something Rivera thought he'd lost forever. The possibility that honor could triumph over expediency, that military values meant something even in the depths of criminal exploitation. The other prisoners, Donnie whispered during another apparent struggle. How many are there? Where are they held? 23 veterans in the residential section, Rivera answered while throwing a combination that looked devastating but targeted Donnie's defensive positioning. Most have been here 6 months or longer. They've stopped hoping for rescue. Donnie's Wing Chun training included meditation techniques that could slow heart rate and create the appearance of unconsciousness while maintaining awareness. But, more importantly, his decades of film work had taught him how to choreograph apparent violence that satisfied audiences while minimizing actual harm. When I go down, Donnie explained, I need you to help me organize the others. Can you reach them from the fighter quarters? Adjacent to our cells, Rivera confirmed. But there are guards, electronic locks, surveillance cameras. Even if we could coordinate resistance, we're outnumbered and outgunned. The wealthy viewers were growing impatient with what appeared to be an evenly matched contest. Their chat comments demanded escalation, blood, the kind of decisive violence that justified their premium subscription fees. Torino's voice carried new urgency as he responded to client pressure. Our audience appreciates technical skill, but they're paying for authentic warrior desperation, he announced. The next phase begins now. Guards entered the arena carrying weapons, not guns, which would end the entertainment too quickly, but knives, clubs, and other implements designed to escalate the violence while maintaining the spectacle. The introduction of weapons meant that careful choreography would no longer be sufficient to protect both fighters. Rivera's face showed the recognition that their situation had become genuinely desperate. Torino's clients wanted blood sport, and the criminal organization was prepared to sacrifice both fighters to satisfy their paying customers' sadistic appetites. But Frank's voice cut through the arena noise, somehow carrying despite the distance and restraints. Donnie, remember what Aunt Lily taught you about family? The words triggered memories of childhood lessons about community, about the responsibility that comes with strength, about the difference between individual survival and collective resistance. Frank was reminding him that this wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about protecting everyone who couldn't protect themselves. Donnie's eyes met Rivera's one final time, and the Marine saw something that had been missing from his months of captivity, hope backed by genuine capability. Not just the hope that comes from wishful thinking, but the confidence that comes from someone who'd spent a lifetime turning impossible situations into opportunities. Get ready to move when I signal, Donnie whispered, and spread the word to every veteran in this facility. Tonight we go home. The weapons were distributed, the arena reset for more lethal entertainment, and the wealthy clients prepared to witness what they believed would be authentic military combat escalated to its logical conclusion. They were about to discover that cornering 24 military veterans with a Wing Chun master was the worst tactical error of their privileged lives. The cavalry that arrived at 4 a.m. consisted of FBI tactical specialists, Sacramento SWAT teams, and state police. An impressive display of law enforcement coordination that would have been devastating if applied to the correct location. Agent Jennifer Walsh directed the assault on Torino's abandoned warehouse facility while the real criminal operation continued 60 feet underground. The surface raid proceeded flawlessly, recovering evidence that federal prosecutors would later use to convict several mid-level operatives in Torino's network. But the timing was precisely wrong. Hours too late to prevent the underground entertainment from reaching its scheduled climax. Meanwhile, in Sacramento's Chinatown, Aunt Lily's disappearance had triggered community response networks that operated faster than official emergency systems. Mrs. Wong had contacted David Chun, who worked in the mayor's office, who'd mobilized city resources that complemented federal investigation efforts. Aunt Lily's been missing for 8 hours, David reported to Agent Walsh via emergency coordination channels. Donnie Yen was last seen entering a vehicle with someone claiming to be Sacramento police. The community has been searching since midnight. The technological breakthrough came from FBI specialists analyzing Torino's communication systems with equipment that could trace encrypted signals through multiple routing servers. The underground facility was located in abandoned subway tunnels that appeared on 1990s construction plans, but had been removed from current city infrastructure maps. Subbasement access through maintenance tunnels. Agent Walsh briefed her tactical team while Sacramento SWAT prepared entry equipment. The facility is extensive, professionally constructed, and probably designed with multiple escape routes. But organizing a proper assault on an underground facility required time that Frank, Aunt Lily, and the imprisoned veterans didn't have. Torino's operation was mobile by design. If threatened with discovery, the entire enterprise could relocate to secondary facilities in Mexico within hours. Agent Walsh faced the classic law enforcement dilemma: move too quickly and risk botching the operation, or take time to plan properly while victims suffered or disappeared permanently. Federal protocols demanded careful preparation, but human reality demanded immediate action. The community search effort provided crucial intelligence. When Mrs. Patterson, the flower shop owner, remembered seeing Donnie enter a vehicle near the warehouse district, her description of the car and approximate timing allowed investigators to trace the route toward the real facility location. We have maybe 30 minutes before they realize we've found them, Agent Walsh calculated, reviewing architectural plans that showed the tunnel system's complexity. After that, they'll either execute the prisoners or evacuate to locations we'll never find. David Chin's city connections provided additional resources that federal agencies couldn't access quickly. Utility workers who knew the tunnel systems, construction supervisors familiar with underground access points, and maintenance personnel who could guide tactical teams through infrastructure most law enforcement had never seen. The final approach required coordination between multiple agencies moving through different entry points simultaneously. FBI teams approached through main access tunnels while SWAT units infiltrated through maintenance shafts and emergency exits. But as the rescue teams prepared their coordinated assault, Torino's voice echoed through the underground facility with an announcement that raised the stakes beyond anything law enforcement had anticipated. Ladies and gentlemen, our evening's entertainment has been interrupted by unwelcome visitors. All prisoners will be relocated immediately to our secondary facility, unless our guests surrender themselves within the next 10 minutes. The ultimatum was broadcast to federal command frequencies that Torino's organization had been monitoring throughout the investigation. Corrupt law enforcement contacts had provided intelligence about rescue efforts, turning the operation into a race between official response and criminal evacuation. Agent Walsh's tactical team was still 20 minutes away from the facility entrance when Torino's deadline expired. Inside the underground complex, 24 military veterans and 2 elderly civilians faced execution or permanent disappearance because federal protocols couldn't move fast enough to save American heroes from the criminals who exploited their service. But Torino had made one crucial miscalculation in his emergency planning. He'd underestimated what happened when you threatened family in front of someone who'd spent 60 years learning that true strength means protecting others. The underground arena erupted into chaos as Torino's emergency relocation order triggered systematic execution protocols designed to eliminate evidence before federal teams could arrive. But his announcement had also served as the signal Donnie and Rivera needed to initiate their own desperate counterstrike. Tank emerged as Donnie's final opponent. But this wasn't the same man who'd attacked Frank at the bus stop. For days of chemical enhancement and psychological conditioning had transformed him into something barely human. His muscles artificially swollen with performance drugs, his eyes reflecting the vacant aggression of someone whose natural inhibitions had been chemically dissolved. Kill or be killed, Torino announced to his global audience of wealthy sadists. No quarter given, no mercy shown. Authentic warrior combat at its most primitive level. The drug cocktail flowing through Tank's system made him insensible to pain while amplifying his rage and physical strength beyond human norms. His first charge came with the force of a freight train, but also with the predictability of someone operating on chemical programming rather than tactical intelligence. That Donnie's Wing Chun training had prepared him for many scenarios, but fighting someone who couldn't feel pain or respond to controlling techniques required adaptation that pushed his skills beyond their traditional boundaries. Tank's enhanced strength made grappling impossible, while his chemical conditioning eliminated the psychological factors that usually helped smaller fighters defeat larger opponents. The arena became a laboratory for applied martial arts philosophy, as Donnie demonstrated how Wing Chun principles could adapt to impossible circumstances. Instead of trying to cause pain or control Tank's movements, he focused on disrupting balance and cutting off blood flow to the brain, techniques that affected physiology rather than nervous system responses. "You can't hurt him," Rivera shouted from the arena's edge, where other imprisoned veterans had begun gathering despite guard attempts to return them to their cells. "The drugs make him feel invincible, but they also make him stupid." Tank's chemical enhancement came with fatal flaws that Donnie began exploiting through superior positioning and tactical awareness. The drugs that made Tank stronger also made him slower to adapt, less able to process changing combat conditions, more vulnerable to techniques that required patience rather than immediate impact. During the battle, Frank's voice carried across the arena with information that changed everything. "Donnie, the guards are leaving their posts. Something's happening upstairs." The veteran prisoners, inspired by Donnie's example and Rivera's leadership, had begun their own resistance movement. 23 men with military training, even after months of psychological abuse, retained enough tactical knowledge to coordinate against their captors when leadership and hope returned. That Tank's drug-enhanced charge left him overextended and vulnerable to a Wing Chun throw that used his momentum against his artificially inflated body weight. He crashed to the arena floor, but the chemicals kept him moving when normal human physiology would have demanded rest. That Rangers' barking echoed through the facility as Frank and Aunt Lily somehow freed themselves from their restraints. The golden retriever had recovered enough to resume his protective duties, adding his natural canine aggression to the growing chaos that threatened Torino's control. The wealthy clients watching via secure video feeds found themselves witnessing something they'd never paid to see. Genuine military heroes fighting for freedom rather than their captors' entertainment. The underground facility transformed into a three-dimensional battlefield as 24 military veterans, led by a Wing Chun master and a determined Marine, turned Torino's entertainment complex into their liberation campaign. Veterans who'd been psychologically broken just hours earlier rediscovered their warrior identities through the simple act of fighting for each other rather than against each other. The Tank's chemical conditioning made him nearly invulnerable to pain, but Wing Chun's efficiency allowed Donnie to gradually wear down his opponent through techniques that targeted physiology rather than nervous system responses. Blood chokes and balance disruptions slowly overcame artificial enhancement, proving that skill could triumph over chemistry when applied with sufficient patience and precision. Frank and Aunt Lily's escape from their restraints triggered a cascade of tactical advantages that Torino's security hadn't anticipated. Frank's enhanced hearing guided other veterans through corridor battles, while Aunt Lily's practical intelligence identified security weaknesses that military training could exploit. "Kitchen area has improvised weapons," she called out in Cantonese, then repeated in English for veterans who didn't speak her first language. "Maintenance tools in the utility rooms. And the guards keep their keys on retractable chains, easy to grab during close combat." Rivera coordinated the veteran assault with Marine precision, turning months of facility observation into tactical intelligence that guided room-by-room clearing operations. Veterans who'd been prisoners an hour earlier became assault teams, liberating their fellow captives through applied military knowledge. The wealthy clients streaming the entertainment found their premium content transformed into something unprecedented. Authentic military cooperation defeating the criminal organization they'd funded for their amusement. Chat comments shifted from bloodthirsty encouragement to panicked demands that someone stop the prisoners' rebellion. Detective Vasquez, the real one, emerged from the prisoner holding area and immediately began coordinating with the veteran assault teams. Her law enforcement training complemented their military experience, creating hybrid tactics that proved devastatingly effective against guards who'd expected compliance rather than coordinated resistance. Torino attempted to salvage his operation by threatening to execute remaining prisoners, but his threats lost power when the intended victims demonstrated they were no longer helpless. Tank's final defeat came when Donnie used a classical Wing Chun pressure point technique that bypassed chemical enhancement to render him unconscious. "It's over," Donnie announced, standing over Tank's unconscious form while veteran teams secured the remaining guards. You fought the drugs as much as you fought me. There's still honor in you. Frank and Ranger provided crucial assistance during the final confrontation, with Frank's military experience guiding tactical decisions, while Ranger's protective instincts and training helped corner fleeing guards in areas where veterans could apprehend them safely. The facility's communication systems, originally designed to broadcast entertainment to wealthy clients, became coordination tools that allowed liberated veterans to communicate with approaching federal teams. Agent Walsh's tactical units arrived to find the underground complex already secured by the people they'd come to rescue. Torino's attempted escape was prevented by Frank, who used terrain knowledge gained through enhanced hearing to position himself and Ranger at the facility's emergency exit. The blind veteran's final confrontation with the criminal mastermind proved that disability didn't diminish courage, that military training remained valuable regardless of physical limitations. "This is for every veteran you exploited," Frank said as he and Ranger prevented Torino's escape. "And this is to show that American heroes don't abandon each other." Detective Santos, the corrupt law enforcement officer who'd enabled the entire operation, was arrested by Agent Walsh as she attempted to flee the FBI field office with evidence and money that would have allowed her to disappear permanently. The global audience of wealthy sadists found their entertainment transformed into evidence that federal prosecutors would use to identify and charge clients throughout the world who'd funded veteran exploitation for their personal amusement. 1 week after the underground liberation, Sacramento General Hospital's secure medical ward housed the recovering victims of Torino's operation, while federal prosecutors built cases that would echo through international courts for years. Tank occupied a bed in the chemical dependency unit, his body slowly purging the performance enhancement drugs while his mind struggled to process memories of forced violence. The hospital's Veteran Services Coordinator, Dr. Maria Santos, no relation to the corrupt detective, reported remarkable recovery progress among the rescued men. Military training provides psychological resilience that helps them process trauma, she explained to Agent Walsh during their weekly briefing. They're healing faster than civilian victims typically do. Frank and Ranger had become unofficial therapy coordinators for the veteran support group that formed spontaneously among Torino's former prisoners. The Golden Retriever's calm presence and training made him perfect for helping other veterans process trauma, while Frank's experience with overcoming disability provided practical guidance for rebuilding lives. "The hardest part isn't the physical recovery," Frank explained during a group session held in the hospital's rehabilitation center. "It's learning to trust again. Trust other people, trust institutions, trust yourself. But we do it together because that's what military families do." Tank attended every group session despite his ongoing medical treatment, showing genuine remorse for his role in the criminal organization while working to understand how desperation had led him to betray fellow veterans. His transformation from predator to protector represented the possibility of redemption that military culture valued. The Sacramento veteran community had rallied around the rescued men with resources and support that demonstrated the bonds military service created. The VFW, American Legion, and veteran service organizations provided housing assistance, job placement, and ongoing counseling that addressed both immediate needs and long-term recovery. Aunt Lily's house became an unofficial headquarters for coordination efforts, with her kitchen serving as command center for volunteers organizing support services. Her practical wisdom and cultural knowledge of community care provided models that official agencies adopted for helping vulnerable veterans. "Healing happens in community," she observed while preparing meals for volunteers and veterans alike. "Individual therapy helps, but recovery requires connection. People who understand your experiences and validate your worth." Detective Vasquez, cleared of all corruption charges and promoted for her investigative work, had been assigned to lead a new federal task force focused on protecting vulnerable veterans from exploitation. Her office featured photographs of the rescued men alongside commendations from military organizations and veteran advocacy groups. The legal proceedings against Torino's organization had expanded into international investigations targeting wealthy clients who'd funded veteran exploitation. For entertainment, Federal prosecutors estimated that dozens of arrests would follow as evidence from the underground facility provided names, financial records, and video evidence of crimes. Donnie visited the hospital daily, not as a celebrity martial artist but as someone who understood that true strength came from lifting others rather than defeating opponents. His presence reminded the veterans that their military training retained value, that their service meant something to people who mattered. Physical rehabilitation is just the beginning, he told the group during one session. The real recovery happens when you remember that your experiences, even the worst ones, can help protect others from similar exploitation. Tank's participation in victim advocacy represented the most dramatic transformation. His size and intimidating appearance, once used to terrorize vulnerable people, now served to protect victims giving testimony against their former captors. The weekly support group meetings had evolved into something larger, a community of veterans, helping other veterans navigate challenges that civilian society often couldn't understand or address effectively. Recovery was measured not just in medical milestones, but in restored dignity, renewed purpose, and the kind of brotherhood that had sustained military units throughout American history. 1 month later, Aunt Lily's house overflowed with celebration as Sacramento's veteran community gathered to honor the men who transformed victimization into victory. The small dining room that had once housed quiet family dinners now accommodated 3 tables pushed together, surrounded by folding chairs borrowed from the neighborhood community center. Frank and Ranger had established their permanent place at Aunt Lily's table, with the golden retriever serving as unofficial greeter for guests, while Frank shared stories that reminded everyone why their military service mattered. His transformation from isolated target to community leader demonstrated how individual strength could become collective power when properly channeled. Tank arrived carrying flowers for Aunt Lily and wearing the kind of nervous smile that came from someone still learning how to participate in healthy relationships. 6 weeks of community service and anger management counseling had revealed intelligence and compassion that years of criminal behavior had hidden beneath artificial aggression. Mrs. Chun, he said formally, presenting the flowers with awkward courtesy that made everyone smile. Thank you for showing me what real family looks like. The neighborhood had implemented community watch programs inspired by how quickly residents had mobilized during the crisis. Elderly business owners now had direct communication systems with younger volunteers, while cultural organizations provided resources that helped vulnerable community members avoid isolation and exploitation. Detective Vasquez arrived with updates on the federal prosecution that had expanded into investigations spanning 12 countries. Torino's client list reads like a directory of international wealth and corruption, she reported. The evidence you helped gather is dismantling criminal networks that have operated for decades. Donnie's reflection on the events emphasized lessons that transcended martial arts and individual heroism. I thought protecting people meant winning fights, he admitted to the gathered veterans and community members. But real protection means building communities where everyone watches out for each other. The veteran support group had grown from 12 rescued men to over 40 local veterans who'd found purpose and connection through shared service to their community. Weekly meetings provided both practical assistance and social connection that prevented the isolation Torino's organization had exploited. Military training teaches us to complete missions, Frank observed during his speech to the gathered celebration. But the most important mission is ongoing, protecting each other and serving something larger than individual survival. Ranger's role as therapy dog had evolved into official recognition from veteran service organizations throughout California. His calm presence and perfect training made him ideal for helping veterans process trauma while providing the unconditional loyalty that military culture valued. The evening's highlight came when Tank stood to address the group, his transformation from predator to protector representing possibilities that everyone in the room had contributed to creating. 6 weeks ago, I hurt people because I was hurting, he began, his voice carrying genuine emotion. You taught me that strength means helping others heal instead of causing more pain. Aunt Lily's closing remarks reminded everyone that individual courage meant nothing without community support. One person standing up to bullies is brave, she observed in her mixture of English and Cantonese that had become familiar to all. The regular visitors A whole community standing together is unstoppable. The bus stop where the story began had become a community gathering place rather than an anonymous urban transit point. Frank and Ranger still waited there each Tuesday. But now they were joined by neighbors who used that location specifically to check on each other and offer support. As the celebration wound down and guests prepared to leave, the scene captured something profound about American community at its best. Military veterans, immigrant families, law enforcement officers, and former criminals working together to ensure that everyone was safer and stronger than they could be alone. The final image showed Frank and Ranger boarding their Tuesday bus, while Donnie arrived for his weekly visit to Aunt Lily. The bus driver, passengers, and nearby pedestrians all greeted both men with genuine warmth and respect, demonstrating that true martial arts mastery wasn't about defeating enemies, but about creating communities where heroism became a shared responsibility rather than an individual burden. 6 months later, when Detective Vasquez contacted Donnie about another case involving vulnerable veterans, she had a network of community partners, reformed criminals, and veteran advocates ready to help, proving that the real victory hadn't been stopping one criminal operation, but building a community that protected all its members. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.